Hello.
Hey, Simon.
Hey, Simon, it's Skylar. How you doing?
Simon.
Hello, Simon.
What's up, Simon?
Hello.
How you doing?
Hey.
Hello.
Hey there.
Simon.
Hello, Simon. Hello, Simon.
Hi, my name is Simon Brooks, and I'm the host of Conversations with Storytellers, a podcast of wisdom, thoughts, and folk and fairy tales from our elders, a meeting with professional storytellers. I decided to travel around the country, when I could, to interview some of the elders in the community of traditional storytelling, people who, for the work they travel about, telling myths and legends, folk and fairy tales. Each storyteller shares their thoughts on our profession and gems of wisdom and sometimes a story or two. I'm glad you're here. I've bumped into Lorna here and there, but got to hear her stories and play her harp at Sharing the Fire years ago. I was able to invite her to this podcast to talk about stories, of course, because I loved what she did. Lorna is an award-winning storyteller and has the National Storytelling Network's Oracle Award for Service. Please enjoy Conversations with Lorna Czarnota. Lorna, thank you so much indeed for being part of my podcast, Conversations with Storytellers. We've bumped into each other a number of times over the years, and I'm always impressed with your talent and skill, not just at storytelling, but also your musical skills as well. Thank you so much indeed for joining the show.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
No, that was an easy ask.
No, it's mutual appreciation here. So.
Oh, thank you very much. So, how did you get into storytelling?
You know I'm a storyteller, so it's going to be a long story. But you cut me off anytime you need to. I did not grow up in a rich storytelling environment. In terms of the way we think of storytelling today, some people grew up on the laps of people at Jonesboro, for instance. Other people grew up in the mountains where storytelling was very rich. I did not, but what's interesting to me is now looking back, I realize that my father was always telling stories. My mother was always telling stories. And so was I. So this is not the thing that started me on a storytelling path as a career. But many years after the fact, I reconnected with a cousin that I grew up with. And he says, "Oh, I could have told you you'd be doing this." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because I remember you telling us stories." And we're very close in age, but, I do recall sitting on their porch, and they lived in Andes, which is in the Catskill region, and we went to visit. There's lots of mountains and hills nearby. Some people wouldn't call them mountains because if you live in the Rockies, they certainly were not the same. But for me, they were mountains, and right now I'm living in Buffalo, which is flat land, and I really miss the hills of home.
Yeah.
But sitting on the front porch, looking up at the hill, I remember one particular instance where I saw all the clouds up on top of the hill, and I thought, I can make up a story about that. And so suddenly they became signal fires from an Indian village, and, but that's the stuff I told my cousins, and I liked to scare them. So
how old were you when you were doing this?
Oh, I was probably 10, 11, 12, much younger much younger than that now that I think of it. So 8 or 9 years old probably.
Oh, wow.
And I loved scaring them, so I never thought of that as anything except having fun with my cousins, So many years later, it resurfaced as, I've been on this path, before I even knew there was a path. And, I think Red Riding Hood would understand what I'm saying.
Yes, there you go.
You don't know where you're going. But what started me on the path as storytelling for a career, I have an interest in history. And around our home here, history is a major topic of conversation. So my significant other is very, very knowledgeable about dates and names, and that's not my forte. I'm more into the way people lived and why they did what they did. But it's a major topic, and so my interest in history, and especially medieval history, I joined a medieval society, the Society for Creative Anachronism. And that was in 1984, right around there, about the same time I became a storyteller.
Right.
I went to an event, and they had a feast. I'm an author, so I have 8 books published now, but I, at that time, was very frustrated because I was writing a lot of folk tales. Not that you can really write a folk tale or a fairy tale in its correct sense, but that ilk, that genre, mostly changing the names and faces to address problems that my friends were having.
Oh, okay.
And so I didn't know what I was doing, but it made sense at that time. I understand it completely now. And I had just gotten another rejection notice because I was sending them to publishers. Nobody was interested in original fairy tales and folk tales. So I kept getting rejections, and I had just gotten one that day, and I went to this medieval feast, sitting with a couple of people, and one of them happened to be a writer, and I was like complaining about, I got rejected again, and I can't get these stories published. And it's so frustrating, and most of those stories, by the way, are still not published, and probably never will be, but they have entered my repertoire as told stories, some of them.
Oh, okay.
And on my recordings over the years. So I was at this feast, and I was complaining about this, and he said a very simple phrase that changed my lifestyle. Why don't you tell your stories? And I was like, what? What are you talking about? Tell my stories. And he said, well, have you heard about storytelling? And I said, no. And he said, this was 1985. And he said, oh, well, for the people of the Middle Ages, the storytellers were very important. They had held a lot of power. They all were almost, they were freer than the peasants to travel from place to place. They could make or break a king by the words that they used. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
What? And I was so thrilled by that. And that they were the people who brought the news, they were the teachers, they were the culture keepers, and they could get paid really well if they did a good job. And in fact, within that medieval society, I have quite a collection of jewelry that has been given to me by individuals and friends who collected money from each other to buy me things, and queens who have taken rings off their fingers and given them to me. And so it's I actually hold the highest honor that you can get in that society for a storyteller.
Wow.
So
well, tell me about that story.
Well, let me just come back.
Okay, sorry.
And this friend also told me, do you know that there is a local guild where you live that have storytellers? And I was like, no. So I joined the guild. I'm still in the guild. We don't have as many people in that guild, and that's the whole story unto itself. But all these years, and that changed my life. So
wow.
you were asking me to expound on, I forgot already.
The ring, the highest honor that you were given. It looked like you were doing a ring thing on your finger there.
So in the medieval society that I belong to, there are several awards for the arts. The first one there are awards for everything, but for just being good at what you do or known for what you do, you can become a lord or a lady, and that was the first thing that I got. I became lady.
Okay.
Not Lorna. I use Gabrielle, which is part of my French persona in the society. And went up from there. I got all the different awards for the arts. And then finally, I was awarded the Laurel, which is the highest society award you can get for the arts.
Wow.
So, yeah, I'm part of that. I have 2 apprentices. Doesn't mean anything in real life, no, but it's good to be recognized for what you do.
It is. Yeah. And you were recognized with an Oracle Award as well from the National Storytelling Network.
You can probably see it back on
I can see it, but our listeners cannot. But there is an award right behind Lorna's head sitting on a shelf that says NSN Oracle Award.
Yes, and so
that's for leadership and service, right?
Yes, it is. And I couldn't be there the day they gave it, so...
Oh, no way. That's too bad.
And even in the medieval society, I wasn't there for most of the awards I was given. I had to be given them after the fact. But I was there for my laurel. So.
Oh, that's good. Yes, I would hope so. Take a day off from the normal...
My laureling ceremony was amazing. It was very unique. The king and queen at the time, they're the ones who got the award. And they held an event just for me.
Wow, that's really cool.
Here in a local armory that has towers, it looks like a castle, and the room that they gave me for sitting my vigil was up in the tower.
So you did a vigil as well?
Yeah, it's like becoming a knight.
Oh wow!
So knighting is for fighting and the military militia arts and whatever. But yes, so I sat vigil and everybody came and gave me gifts and advice, and I was up in this tower, and then for my procession into the Great Hall to see the King and Queen, we told a story. So we were led by Celts holding spears, and a Japanese procession, and I had children with fairy wings throwing trinkets to the crowd, and they were preceded by a unicorn. I had Middle Eastern dancers, and everybody went up and presented gifts to the King and Queen from me. So it was a lot of fun and very exciting.
That's so cool. So this is
just like my wedding. Just like my wedding, I don't remember a lot from that day.
Sounds like you had a good time, though.
I did.
So this medieval society, when you got involved, how did you hear about that? Was it just something that you just saw somewhere and thought that would be interesting?
My significant other had found out about it and had joined, and he had gone to a few events. And so he's the one who told me about it. When we were still friends, and then that blossomed. But
that's really cool. And so this is kind of it's like cosplay, but it's a lot more serious than cosplay by the sound of it. It's educational. They don't really call themselves reenactors, so to speak. Okay.
But they call themselves an educational organization, and so every summer they hold a big war in Pennsylvania. The loser gets Pittsburgh, and
yes, I know. I wasn't going to say anything.
Well, that area is called the debatable lands, so it doesn't really have any affiliation with anyone except through winning the war. And I go every year. The first one I went to was number 17, year 17, and it is now. They canceled it last year because of the pandemic, and again,
right.
This year would have been year 50.
Wow.
And I go and I sell spinning and weaving supplies from a tent. And
so do you spin?
I do.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. That's so cool.
It's living a story, that's all. It gives me a chance to live a story.
That's so neat. So just for people that don't know where the Catskills are and where Rochester is, It's in New York State. So Buffalo is pretty much Canada. They get a lot of snow.
Well, we're framed here by Lake Ontario and Lake Erie, and we are as far away in New York State as you can get from New York City. So
Right.
a lot of people, when you say I'm from New York, they think New York City automatically. It's over 400 miles away from us.
Which is a how long drive? 10 hour?
At least.
Yeah.
It takes me about 6 to 8 hours of comfortable driving to get to Albany, which is the capital of New York.
Right. That's, yeah.
And beyond that is New York City.
Which is further south. For those that don't know the geography of the state. That's amazing. That's so cool that you've been doing that for that long. And that the organization, trying to do quick math there, has been going on since the 70s. That medieval organization.
Yeah.
If you joined in 84, 85, and it was 17 years before that, right? I mean, that's...
Well, that was just that event.
Okay.
So,
so the organization might have been going on before that then?
Yeah.
Before they... Oh, wow.
It started in Berkeley, California at the college.
Oh, okay. So, right. So it's affiliated with that. That's really cool. So you mentioned that your father and mother would read or tell you stories, is what I think you said. Did they make up stories to tell you, or were they reading stories to you? What kind of stories were they?
Well, it's yeah. So first of all, I'm a major reader, and I'm probably. It's funny because except for a few magazines, health books, and maybe the newspaper, there were very few books in my parents' home. But I'm an avid reader, and they basically subscribed me to all of the children's magazines and book collections, Hardy Boys and all of that. And I spent a lot of time reading as a child, and my mother read to me from some of those books. But I grew up thinking that my mother might have been Lucille Ball. I mean, she was just like creative and imaginative, and I get all that from my mom,
That's really cool. So was she as nutty as Lucille Ball?
Yeah, when we were growing up, she was. Yeah, that was good. And then my dad was quite the trickster. So most of the stories that he told us were in joke form, and a lot of them are not fit for me to tell very many people.
Okay, so I'm assuming that you heard those later on in life.
Just to give you an idea of the kinds of things my dad would do. I remember some of these things. He used to, when he was a young man, carry a pocket full of nickels. And he said he would go up to the girls and he would say, I'll bet you a nickel I can kiss you without touching you. Oh, you can't do that, they would say. Go ahead and try, I'll take that. So then he would just kiss them and hand them a nickel.
What a cheeky man.
Yeah.
Can't do that these days.
No.
Can't do that these days. That's interesting. So you play the harp, and you play it beautifully, because I've heard you do that. You were sitting, I think it was at Sharing the Fire, I heard. Was it Sharing the Fire?
It's hard to say.
Yeah, it was either Sharing the Fire or one of the NSN conferences, but I think it was at Sharing the Fire. And you were just sitting there in the corridor playing the harp, and it was absolutely gorgeous. And I just sat there, and I think Bill Harley was just down the hall and chatting with someone else. And there were all these people listening to what you were doing. How old were you when you started learning musical instruments? And was that the first one, or did you migrate from one instrument to another?
You're asking me so many fun questions. So I was, when I was growing up, the music classes in school included flutaphone. Have you ever heard of a flutaphone? I think
no.
it's a lot like a recorder and what they call recorders today, but they were flutaphones.
Okay.
I couldn't get it. I couldn't play it to save my life. And I couldn't read music, and I didn't understand music. And I was really terrible at math, which, what I have been told since is that math and music go together. And so I just couldn't get it. And I used to love singing. My friends in the neighborhood would do these shows on each other's. They still make flutaphones. My goodness.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have found a flutaphone. It does look remarkably like a recorder, but it also looks kind of like a clarinet. So imagine a clarinet without all the fancy buttons and having holes in it and made of plastic, and you've got a flutaphone.
Or something for charming snakes or something else.
Yes, that's what it is.
So I couldn't get it, but I used to sing into the end of a jump rope. That was our microphone when we were kids.
Fun.
On my friend's front porch, we used to sing the Beatles and have a good time, do these little shows and make believe. But I was actually 40 years old before I got this. I first got a lap dulcimer, and this was going back to the medieval society again. A friend of mine in the medieval society had gotten himself a dulcimer, a lap dulcimer, mountain dulcimer, and he let me try it, and I fell in love with it. And
so this is what's also known as an Appalachian dulcimer?
Yes.
Okay, so it's like a very skinny guitar with 3 strings, is that right? Or 4 strings?
4. 3 or 4.
Okay.
A couple of them are played as drones, and you play it by laying it flat on your lap, although, people have done all different ways of holding it over the years. And he took me to help me buy my first instrument at a local string shop. And so the first thing I started playing was the lap dulcimer, and I used to sit in my living room for hours and hours and hours just strumming this thing and having a great time. But I was 40 years old before I did that, so I didn't understand music or anything, but this dulcimer just spoke to me. I now have 2 of them, and I have a third one that somebody gave me that I gave away. So you get hooked on these things. And then the next thing, that very same friend had gotten himself a harp, and again he let me hold it and play with it, and I loved it. And then he took me to help me buy my first harp. So I bought this little lap harp, a little Celtic lap harp with 19 strings, and that's what you probably heard me playing. I now have 3 harps and a guitar and several drums and zithers and a piano. And 3 or 4 fiddles. But the things that I play most often are the harp and the fiddle.
Oh wow, that's so neat. So you didn't become an official musician. We'll count the singing because that one should. But you didn't become an official musician until you were 40. That's freaking awesome.
Yeah.
And now you play a whole range of stuff. I
do, and I can't say that I play for human consumption. The harp I do.
Yeah.
And I only play music that I've written on the harp.
Okay.
So I took lessons for 2 years from a local woman who played for our Buffalo Philharmonic Orchestra.
Oh wow! Okay.
I got to the point when we were there, I was learning to play from sheet music. I got to a point where I just felt I wasn't progressing. And I had started writing a lot of things with the harp. And so I stopped taking the lessons and just went on to actually using it in some of my programs. I haven't written anything new for the harp in quite a while. But I remember saying to Beth, my teacher, I feel a little bit, I don't know, I want to say uncomfortable, but like I'm not a real musician because I can't play from the music. And she said, do you know how many people would kill to be able to write their own music?
Yeah.
So you don't have to be able to do that. And now just studied piano for a little while, for a couple of years, and I think I could go back to maybe doing some of that with the sheet music.
Oh wow, that's so cool. So your significant other, isn't he a musician as well?
No.
Oh, okay. So
he used to design toys for Fisher-Price.
Oh, he did?
Yeah. I don't know. Okay. So are you familiar with some of the toys?
Yes.
Do you know the barn by any chance?
I do.
You know how when you open the doors, it would go moo?
Yes.
He put the moo in the barn door.
You need a T-shirt with that.
Yeah, my husband put the moo in the barn door. I like that. I'll show you something else. I know your viewers, your listeners can't see this, but up here on my shelf, they can hear maybe.
Yes, they can. I think I've seen one of those. This is a tomato.
Nope, it's a happy apple.
Oh, it's a happy orange apple, or it looks orange on the screen anyway. That's why I went with.
It's very red. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So there's a big red apple. It's probably the size of a. Well, it's big.
Can you
it plays
hear the
music.
chime?
Yeah.
It's got a big smile on its face. That's my husband's. That's my husband's invention.
That is so neat. What is that? I'm assuming was that made by Fisher-Price?
Yes.
I'm going to see if I can find one of those, because that's awesome. That's so cool.
Happy apple is what they were called. And he also, the little dog they have that you pull around. They also had a little cow called Molly Moo Cow. It had udders on it. He was on the design team that did that too. So.
Did he make that one moo?
No. That would have been.
It would have been good. It waddles along and its udders swing and it moos.
Yeah, so he used to work for Fisher-Price, and he was still working for Fisher-Price when I met him. So he was part of a big layoff in the 80s, though.
Yeah, the 70s and 80s were a rough time. Back onto storytelling. You said that you mentioned
storytelling. It's all
You said that you were writing first, and you do have 8 books published. But you're also featured in a couple of at least 2 anthologies that I know of. And 3 of the books...
5 anthologies altogether, I think.
Okay, so it's 8 books that you've authored yourself, and then you've been in 5 anthologies, which is awesome. That's brilliant. And 3 of those books are a series of books that are targeted at people that work with at-risk children.
Yes.
And you do a lot of work with at-risk children.
Yeah.
How did you get into that? What drew you into that work?
Just like everything else in my life, Simon, it was all by accident.
Yeah.
Nothing has ever been planned. I just tend to be a very open person, and I say yes a lot to the things that the universe throws my way.
It's a good way to be.
You say yes a few times, and if it's successful, then you're not so afraid to say yes again and again. And not every one has panned out the way I would like it to, but I used to spend a lot of time regretting my past, and now I look and say it's all been part of the journey that led me to where I am right now. And I'm very happy to say I'm happy with who I am and who I've become. So sadly, it was a sad situation that led to my work with at-risk youth. But again, it's a blessing in disguise, because it did put me on that journey. My niece, and I don't think she would mind me saying this, I won't say her name or anything like that, but
okay.
I have told many people the story, and it's in the books anyway, but in 1995, she became a runaway. She ran away from home. And there's a lot of kids who do that. I did it. In fact, my parents had a flood in their home, and I was staying in their home when I was working in the area where they lived, and they were snowbirding to Florida. And I had to clean out a filing cabinet full of wet files, and I found one with my name on it. which my dad eventually gave me to keep. But in that folder, there was my report card from grade school. And you want to talk about stories? I'm going all over the place, but I'll get back to your question. So in there was a report card. My interest in the Middle Ages started in grade school with a teacher who did the kind of program that I do in schools for children. And she had signed the report card to the best peasant in the kingdom, signed Lady Elizabeth. And that report card was in that folder. The other thing that was in that folder was, I forgot where I was going with this. Simon, what was your question? Oh, about at-risk youth, and I told you. Yeah. Oh, the other thing in that folder was the letter that I wrote to my parents. I'm running away from home and I'm never coming back. Yeah. And I do know that I called my parents an hour later, and they came and got me.
I did a similar thing. I had an evil stepfather, and I'd had enough, and I planned it, and I had my bicycle set, and at midnight I took off on my bicycle, and I was heading to my dad's house in Wales, and I cycled from midnight until 3 o'clock in the morning, and was so exhausted I needed to sleep, but I couldn't find anywhere that I felt safe to sleep where I was. And so I phoned my parents up from a phone box, and my evil stepfather came to pick me up because my mother couldn't drive at that time. And she didn't learn to drive until she was about 40 something, maybe 50. So she was you talk about you going into music. My mum didn't get into driving. She still doesn't really like it that much until she was much older. But anyway, he came and picked me up, and it was a very silent drive back home, a little bit of humility.
Yeah. Well, my niece...
But we made our statements, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And our parents learned a little bit more about parenting, too.
Yes. Well, maybe yours did. My stepdad didn't. He was a ding-dong. But anyway.
Yeah, it took my dad a while. In fact, years later, he actually confessed to me. He said, I want to apologize, because he and I were fire and water when I was a teenager. And he said, I want to apologize. He said, I just didn't know how to be a parent. I said, that's okay, Dad. It's a learning experience. You're not given a meal when your kids are born,
I know. You get the placenta, but nothing else.
But anyway, my niece ran away from home, but her situation was real.
Right.
She was gone 3 weeks before anybody even told me about it, and I only found out about it because I called and asked to talk to her, and her mother said, she's not here.
Wow.
She, for quite a few years leading up to that point, had wanted to leave, and I would call me. We were very connected, and she would call me, and I would rush down there and take her off somewhere where we could be alone, and we would talk about it, and how it wasn't a good idea, and how it was a bad idea. And then she got more and more serious, and we sat down and we looked at a budget of what she would need to live comfortably and safely. And it was going well until that moment when she was co-facilitated by a slightly older boy who also wanted to leave home, and they did. Think about all of the statistics of things that you hear that can happen to young ladies on their own.
Mm-hmm.
She was a high school dropout, abused, and it goes on and on.
Yeah.
The good news is that she survived. She survived largely because I think, and I'm going to put this on myself, and give myself the credit for this, but because I worked really hard to keep her in the family fold. And so she maintained the connection with me, with her grandparents, who eventually took her in and helped her finish her high school education. Right now, she's married, has her own home for the first time, and 4 beautiful children. The second one just graduated from high school, and he graduated with on the National Honor Society.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's such a good story.
It is. It's a happy ending, but not all kids' stories are that happy, you know?
No.
So
No.
I couldn't do anything to help her. There's 150 miles between me and my main family. So I lived, how I got in Buffalo is a whole other story. But my family was here, and they went back, and I stayed here. So there's that distance between us, and she was on her own with this boy, and I couldn't reach her. There was no way to reach her. There was nothing I could do, and she was like the daughter I never had, and it was horrible, Simon. I was anxious all the time. Every terrible thing that could happen to a kid who wasn't streetwise, and I mean, it all went through my head, and I reached out, and finally, and I don't remember how I found them, honestly, but I found a local runaway shelter and resource center here in Buffalo. Compass House is the new organization. And I have ever since 1995, when my niece ran away and I reached out to this organization, it became my soul's work, not just my life's work, but my soul's work. I have been the resident storyteller with that runaway shelter ever since. I go twice a month and work with the kids there.
Wow.
I worked for a while, for 9 years, as a matter of fact. I was the resident storyteller in a trauma treatment facility where the children lived and went to school and got their treatment. And since then, I have been doing that work. Since then, I have realized that we do more than just tell stories.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, there is a connection that we make in everyday life that I think I would not have done without storytelling. You know, talking to people sitting in the waiting room or on the elevator and telling them my story, hearing their stories. I don't think I would have done that. I don't think I would have done that. And
without the storytelling. So you tell all sorts of different kinds of stories. So you do folk and fairy tales. You also do your original stories, which you mentioned already. So are those kind of like Hans Christian Andersen type of things, where they're literary fairy tales, as you might call them?
Yeah, I would say pretty much.
Okay.
And there are some more folkish type stories as well. So I have a pourquoi tale, you know, pourquoi being the why and how stories. The night wolf ate the moon.
Nice.
You know,
I think is that on your CD?
It's on one of my recordings. I don't remember which one.
Yeah, I think it is, because I know that story, and I know that I haven't heard you tell it live. So you also do historical stories and personal storytelling. So you do the full gamut, which is really, and when you do the historical storytelling, you do that in costume.
Costume, usually in persona.
Right.
So I'm in character. I do a story on the Dust Bowl, the American Dust Bowl.
And that's called Moving Dress, right?
The Move-In Dress. The Move-In Dress, yeah.
Right. So tell me about that, because that kind of it's set in the Depression, right?
It's set in the Depression, which is when the Dust Bowl happened, and the two events were not really the same, but they coincided with each other. So for the people in the heartlands, the Midwest, and places, the breadbasket of America, they were not only going through the Great Depression, but they were having their crops and their homes and their lives destroyed by these walls of dust that would blow across the plains. And part of that was due to poor conservation of the soil. They plowed up the fields to plant more crops because they needed the money. And so it all came together in what we would call a perfect storm, no pun intended.
Yeah.
So back, I don't remember how many years ago, I've lost track of time. Sometimes I have to think in terms of how old was I, or, my parents passed away in 2009 and 2010, so it was probably at least 10 years before that. That's the way I calculate time. But it was a long time ago, and it must have been an anniversary year, either of the Dust Bowl or maybe the Grapes of Wrath movie. I'm not sure which, but which is about the Dust Bowl.
Right.
And it was some anniversary year in a very small town called Holly, New York, and it is a very small place. Their library somehow or another got a hold of me, and they said, we would like you to write a story or to come and tell a story about the Dust Bowl. And I said, well, I'm going to write a story about the Dust Bowl. So it's inspired by the Grapes of Wrath. It's about a woman and her family in Oklahoma, farmers who were very prosperous until the Dust Bowl took everything they had. And they had to pack up and move to California like so many people. 25% of the American population was unemployed. I think it was something like, it was thousands, maybe 25,000, 250,000 or 400,000, I forget, people who were on the road looking for work.
Right.
It was incredible, and so a lot of people migrated to California, where they were hiring migrant workers for pennies a day. And so that whole story is, the Move-In Dress is based on that. And it's titled The Move-In Dress because of my mother, in a way. My mother and father did not have a lot of money when we were growing up. And my father was my adoptive father. I wanted my mother got divorced. I was born in Texas. All Texan, and I was born in Texas. But I came to New York State when I was just a babe in arms. So Texas is just a memory and something I'm just proud of. But she met a man, my dad, my natural dad. She met him at the Oneonta Hotel in Oneonta, New York, which is in the Catskill region, around Cooperstown and that area. The story is that my mom had gone out with a girlfriend that night, and she was selling kisses for $1, and my dad bought one.
Your dad likes his kisses, doesn't he?
And I don't think he even gave her a nickel, but you never know. I think he gave her $1, so that was the most expensive kiss he ever got. But I wanted a new dad when I turned 5 for my birthday, and so they got married on my birthday.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
That's
so
excellent.
what were we talking about, Simon?
I'm not sure anymore. The Moving Dress is what we were talking about.
Yeah. So I said it was because of my mother, because they didn't have a lot of money. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, but when we were little, we had her mother, my grandmother, moved in with us to take care of us while my mother worked. And then after she got married, my grandmother continued to live with us for a while. My dad went to college, and my mother worked. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. So, but she said, we don't have a lot of money. This is what she told me. But there's never an excuse to be dirty because soap is cheap.
Right. Yeah. Yes. That's a really cool line.
So there's a line in the Move-In Dress where they've lost everything. They've lost this prosperous farm that my main character, who doesn't have a name, but the main character's husband's family built this farm. They settled it during the Oklahoma land rush, and they built it up, and it was very prosperous. Her husband had worked the farm since he was a little boy. He managed to pay off the mortgage, although they had to re-mortgage it many times. They took out loan after loan after loan just to get by, but they always paid it off. And then finally there came a day when they couldn't. Everything snowballed. The dust came, it destroyed the crops. They needed money for seed to plant more crops. The tractor engine got clogged with dust. They needed to repair the tractor engine. Her youngest son died of dust pneumonia, and so she wanted a proper burial for him. And they couldn't pay off the loan, and one day the bank came and they said, pay your loan or lose the farm. And while they begged and pleaded for another week, they weren't given that other week. And they packed what they could, they sold what they could, they gave away what they couldn't. And they had to leave all of this behind and take their family of 6 children out to California, where they started to work there for other people for, not even enough money to feed the family for a single day. So they went from all of that to nothing. And then back to having something again. But there's one line as they're packing up, the day they have to leave their home, their farm. She says, I put on my moving dress. I smoothed the wrinkles out, and I looked in the mirror that still hung on the wall and tucked my hair in place. We might be poor, but there's no need to look shabby.
Yeah, and you can
loaded up the children, and we headed to California.
Wow. And you can hear that line on Lorna's website, because there's a little trailer for that. So, yeah, and you're all in costume there, and it's shot in black and white, which I like.
Yeah. So the move-in dress is the move-in dress. It's the dress she put on the day she had to move, and she kept it. She kept it with all the memories.
Right, because she puts it up to her face later on and smells it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that comes from being a healing storyteller, and one day watching after some disaster, earthquake or hurricane or something, watching people going through piles of rubble and picking up broken teacups and broken picture frames, and you're like, why are you doing that? And then as a storyteller you say, because each one of those things holds a story. And
right.
those stories connect us with who we are.
Yeah.
So the move-in dress is very important. It's an artifact. It's an artifact of her life.
Yeah, and that story, even though you made that up, that story is a true story of someone, right?
Yes, I mean it's not a true story. It's not based on any one particular person, but
right.
It's inspired by the Grapes of Wrath, as I said, and the history, and doing your research and learning about the way people lived and the things that they went through. I sang for a little while with the Blue Eagle String Band. But this was after I wrote that story, and we did songs from the Great Depression. And right now, if you saw that clip, did I have the musician in the beginning of that?
There is music. There's guitar playing or something like that. So beautiful guitar playing, actually.
I did this as a performance online during the pandemic, and invited this the lead musician from the Blue Eagle String Band, and he did that. He was the music in that program. He came and he did some live music up front. Well, right now I am negotiating with him and another musician. We're going to turn the move-in dress into a musical.
Oh, wow.
So we're currently working on that plan and hoping to actually do performances in the fall.
Are you also going to do that online?
I think so. I don't know what they, a lot of it's going to depend, I guess, on venue.
So, because you do folk and fairy tales, and you do your original stories and your history and personal stories, what do you find the most rewarding for you? What speaks to you most?
The historical stories. I do another one about Joan of Arc, for instance.
Oh.
But not as Joan, because so many people have done Joan. And because Joan did not keep a journal, and because we don't really know what Joan was thinking,
right.
I decided to tell it from the perspective of a woman whose husband served in her army. Again, a fictitious person.
Yeah.
But that way I can see it through the lens of an observer. But I love doing that because I love doing the research and crafting the stories around it. But I would say most of what I do with my teens and my at-risk programs are folk and fairy tales because of the very rich and meaningful metaphors for life that are in those, and how it allows us to step back and see life at a safe distance as it's played out by the characters.
Yeah. So could you go a little bit deeper into that?
I can try. So again, I'll share a story. So an actual something that happened to me. So years ago, everything is years ago, far, far away. Early in my storytelling career, I was hired by the Backyard Circus. So the Backyard Circus is created by a gentleman who is now retired, and it was to spur children's imaginations. So the children became the performers in this little circus, and they made believe that they were walking tightropes, and they made believe that they were the lions and had all these costumes. And I was hired for their teddy bear wagon. They had this was for the CNE, which is the Canadian National Exhibition, 10-day event.
Wow.
And, they had 3 wagons. I forget what the third wagon was, but one of them was the circus, where they would do regular shows, and the children and families would come and they would go through the circus, and I had a break then. And then they had the teddy bear wagon, which was filled with all kinds of teddy bears. It was just a facade wagon, it was not a real wagon, it was a facade.
Okay.
And all of these teddy bears, and a big cauldron for making teddy bear stew, make believe teddy bear stew. And I would always joke and say, no, we don't throw the bears in the stew. And I was the teddy bear lady, but I didn't dress as a bear, but I was a storyteller. So I was supposed to engage the children in make-believe and making the stew and what they would put in it, and tell stories about bears. And at that time, I think I knew 2 stories about bears. I knew Goldilocks and the 3 Bears, and the song The Bear Went Over the Mountain. And my schedule was the fair, I'm guessing at the time, so the fair would open at something like 9 in the morning or 10 in the morning. And then the section where we were would close around 5, 6 o'clock. Of course, the carnival itself would still be going on. And that was my schedule, get there in the morning, and when they weren't holding the circus, whenever a group of children or a child or a family would come by, I would engage them. So you can imagine, no set schedule. Doing this, you could be doing it for 20 minutes, you could be doing it for an hour, you could be doing, just people coming and going. 10 days.
That's a lot.
Days.
That's a run.
I need 2 bear stories, right? So after 3 days, I said, I'm not going to make it. I don't figure out what Goldilocks really means, because I'm so tired of telling that story. And every time I would tell the story, I would say to the children, what does that mean to you? And they would say, don't go into someone's house when they're not home. And for a little child, that's a very, very, very good thing to remember.
Right.
You don't go into somebody's house when they're not home. And you don't take their things without asking. There's so many good lessons in that story for young children. But I'm the storyteller, and I had to make it meaningful. So, this was a discovery moment, Simon. Just one of those many, many discovery moments that changed my life. When I realized that if I can't find meaning in the story for me as the teller,
Right.
then I don't feel I'm doing a good job telling the story. It doesn't mean that you have to have the same meaning, but it has to be meaningful to me. Otherwise, I'm just on automatic. So, and I had to do this for 10 days. So that after that third day, I took Goldie back to my motel. And I psychoanalyzed the poor girl. I said, you lie right over there on the couch, Goldie, and we're going to have a conversation. And we did. Now, I have a shelf over here. It's my resource book shelf. And it's full of, dictionaries and that kind of thing, synonyms and antonyms and homonyms. And it also has a lot of books on symbolism and some books on magic and that kind of thing. And so I had done a lot of reading, Joseph Campbell, for instance, and a lot of reading from those books and studying. And so metaphor has always interested me. And I said, Goldie, we got to figure out what you mean. And so I took that story and I pulled it apart. I made a list of every number, every color, every character, every setting, every object, and I assigned meaning to it based on what I knew about symbolism and metaphor. The house being security, and so on and so on and so on. And then it was like I finally understood something about that story. And I said, I'm going to try telling that story different tomorrow for the children. I'm going to tell it in first person as Goldilocks. So the next day, I told the story. When the children came, the first group of children came, I said, let me tell you a story about something that happened to me when I was a child. I went walking in the woods one day, and I told the whole story that way. And as I was doing that, things were happening to me personally.
Oh.
I'll come back to that in a moment. Because when I finished the whole story, the little girl sitting in front had these big, beautiful curls like Goldilocks. She looked up at me and she said, You're Goldilocks. I never said my name. I just told the story. Goldilocks. And it was like somebody set off an atom bomb and everything went whoosh right over me. And I was flooded with, oh my God, I am Goldilocks. And here's the thing, Simon. I had been an interior designer for 15 years. That's what I went to college for. But I had gotten divorced and I felt like I needed security. So I decided to become a teacher. I looked at what do I want to do that I think I'd be really good at doing that would be meaningful in life. And I became a teacher. So I was 40 years old. About the same time I became a storyteller. About the same time I learned music.
Right.
And I went back to school to be a teacher.
You got your BA.
I got my BA through Empire State College, which is a non-traditional college, but it's connected with the university, and they give you life credits. So I got credits for all of my life that helped me to get that bachelor's degree.
That's excellent.
I went on and I got my master's in education and special education with an award, by the way, for in special education. And I asked my dad for a loan because I didn't want to take a loan out of the bank. I said, Dad, I had gotten a lot of scholarships, but I still had money to pay back college. And I spent a lot of time. I was 40 years old, but my dad and how and his advice and how he thought of me was very important to me. And I said, Dad, I know I've worked really hard to be an interior designer, and I stayed in Buffalo to go to college for that after my family left. And I worked really hard, and I've sacrificed, and I've created a name for myself in the local design. I even taught design at the same college next to my professor, and all of that. And I said, now, Dad, I want to be a teacher. And so it took me a long time to convince him that this was a good change for me in my life. Did it matter? No, but it mattered to me. And so he really agreed with this. And I went to him and I asked him for a loan to pay off my student loan. Instead of giving the interest to the bank, Dad, I'd rather give the interest to you. And my dad said, it was like $9,000, which was a minute amount to pay off the loans, but that's all I had left. And he said, I'm not going to loan you the money. It's part of your inheritance, and I'd like to give it to you now while I'm still alive because you could use it. So my dad handed me $9,000.
Wow.
Loan. And someplace in between the end of being an interior designer and the beginning of becoming a teacher, storytelling found me back in the medieval group, right? Going back to our original story. And I was getting calls, more and more calls for storytelling. At the same time, I was getting calls for substitute teaching and going on interviews for teaching. And I said, something's got to give, because both of these things are pulling at me. I want to be a teacher. I want to be a storyteller. If somebody calls me to tell stories somewhere, no, I can't tell stories. I'm teaching today. Somebody calls me to teach. No, I can't teach. I'm telling stories today. And I had to give myself 100% to something.
Yeah, I get that.
And storytelling was it. It had such a pull for me.
Yeah.
My whole life, I told you, going back to everything that happened to me in my life, my whole life was bringing me to that moment. And I had to now go to my dad and say, Dad, you just gave me $9,000. I want to be a storyteller. Oh, a storyteller? What's that?
Can I have another $9,000?
So I was trying to figure out how to do that on that day that I was Goldilocks. And that whole thing rushed over me, and I said, I am Goldilocks. I am that little girl, all grown up, looking for what's just right for me. Looking for the chair that I can sit in.
Yeah.
Looking for the porridge, the food, the nourishment that I can eat. Looking for the bed where I can fall asleep. And thank goodness the bears came home, because they woke me up. If they hadn't woke me up, if I hadn't continued my journey, I'd still be asleep. And that was the moment I knew how to tell my dad. And that was the moment I became a true storyteller.
Wow. That's an amazing story.
And that was the moment I realized the power of metaphor.
Yeah, metaphors, and symbolism. It's amazing stuff. There's magic in that. There's power in that. So Lorna, there's one thing that I read on your website. You say that you do a lot of humanitarian work. Could you describe that a little bit?
Well, my visits, I guess you could say that my work is humanitarian. My visits to the runaway shelter, in the beginning, I used to have a symbiotic relationship with them. they would say, well, we want to pay you. And I would say, but I don't want to be paid. But here's what we'll do. You don't have a lot of money. I don't need a lot of money at that time. You pay me when I need it. I'll ask you.
Oh, that's nice.
So I would, they were giving me maybe $1,000 a year, which isn't a lot if you're going twice a month. But that's all they had. And then eventually that dried up and they couldn't pay me anything. But the work was too important to not do it. So my work with the teens at the runaway shelter is gratis. I don't get paid for that. But if they had the money, I would gladly take it.
No, we all. I think every single one of us has something that we do for nothing. We do it for love, is what we do it for. We do it for our souls.
It feeds my soul. Yes,
it does. You mentioned before we got onto the call that you gave a CD away to some guy.
Yeah. So let me connect this with your question about humanitarian work.
Yeah.
So I have a 501c3 Crossroads Story Center. Again, it was one of those weird things. I was doing a presentation at a storytelling conference on the work I do with teens, and a woman came up and said, I have a foundation. I want to give you money to become a 501c3.
Oh, wow.
But I hate writing grants, and I don't do a very good job of it, and yes, I have to, and blah, blah, blah. I can take myself in a closet and admonish myself constantly. So I could be getting paid something for the work that I do, but that's a whole other story. I'm going to come back to your question, I promise, about the young man.
Okay.
But first, story sit-in. So I go to a church up the road and around the corner, about 15 minutes from where I live. That again was one of those weird things. I was there with my fiddle group, fiddling in the church for their Sunday service, and I ended up staying as part of the congregation. But there's a neighborhood nearby that is largely low-income immigrant. There's a lot of immigrants in that neighborhood from the Middle East, from Africa. And one day, as I was trying to connect with the people in that neighborhood, and I saw some boys playing outside of our church. They were playing with a ball. And I just went outside and I said, would you like to hear a story? And they sat down and they heard a story. And they lived across the street from the church, but they never came to the church. And so I just told them stories when I saw them out and about. And then one day I was driving my van past this neighborhood. And, I'm a very spiritual person. I am Christian, but I've dabbled in lots of other things. I've come back to my roots, which was Christian. And that song, Jesus Take the Wheel? Forget her name, but I'm driving along and then all of a sudden I said, I've got to go down this street. I don't know why I got to go down this street. So I turned down the street and there were a group of children playing in the yard. The apartments take up 2 city blocks on both sides of the block. And they have like a little group of maybe 3 buildings with a grassy courtyard in between. And then they'll have another 3 buildings with another grassy courtyard and so on and so on. And most of the times the people within those apartments, that's their courtyard and they don't cross the line very much, so some of the children do. I saw a group of children playing and I pulled over my van and I got out and I went over and I made sure I had visible contact with adults, so they knew it was on the up and up, and I said, would you like to hear a story? And I sat down and I told them stories. It's now 6 years that I've been doing that.
Wow.
Every summer. And I set a day and a time. Now I'm at the point where I take a wagon, people give me books. I walk up and down that 2 blocks. I find groups of children and families and even adults and tell them stories and interact and talk to them. Sometimes I take my puppet. Sometimes most often I give them a free book from my story wagon. I have a blanket, they spread it out on the ground, the children sit, I sit on a stool. So that's story sit-in. Again, I don't get paid. I want to get a sponsor or a grant to expand that work, hopefully.
Yeah.
And then last year, right before everything shut down during the pandemic, I had this idea, really, that story sit-in is part of a bigger plan, and so is Yard Tales. Yard Tales, Saturday afternoon in my front yard.
How big's your front yard?
Not huge. It's maybe 10 by 10. It's not huge.
Okay, all right.
I have some chairs that a friend gave me. I set up a little circle of chairs. I put out a sign, come hear a story. I have my wagon with my books there for the children. I try to do things that will get attention from people passing by. So I've had my harp out there. This goes back to the harp. I've had my harp out there. I've had my spinning wheel out there. One Saturday, I invited a woman with a cello, and she and I are working out a collaboration of storytelling and cello music. And so we worked out there for a little while. And I've had all kinds of really neat little experiences. I'm going to come back to it, because that's the young man with the CD. But this whole thing with story sit-in and yard tales is part of a bigger plan that I have. Do you remember the happenings of the 1970s? A happening was where an artist would create an art piece and it would be destroyed at the same time. So it might involve...
Yeah.
Well, there were lots of these little things like street performers, and my bigger plan is that eventually a circle of chairs will just appear somewhere in the city with a sign that says, come hear a story, share a story. And I'm getting closer to making that a reality.
That's neat. I like that idea.
So one day, I was sitting in Yard Tales, and my next door neighbors came over, and I shared stories with them. And then I was just packing up my things, and I had written in the chalk on the sidewalk, Yard Tales, with an arrow pointing to my yard. This young man, I would say he's in his 20s, but I'm terrible guess of age. Everybody looks young to me anyway.
I know, like you reach a certain age and you have no idea. So they could be 20, they could be 16. I know, totally with you.
So I'm in a commercial neighborhood. So my street is commercial. In fact, my property is zoned commercial. And we get all kinds of people just driving down the street to shop at the stores on their way here and there. Not necessarily neighbors or people we know, a lot of strangers. Mm-hmm. There's a certain amount of caution that goes with that. Mm-hmm. But Yard Tales is supposed to be twofold. Making me visible as the storyteller in my own neighborhood. I want people to drive by and say, the storyteller lives there. 10, 15, 20, 50 years from now, I want people to go by and say, there used to be a storyteller living there. Because there was, once upon a time when we first moved in, a little house that looks like a cottage in the neighborhood. And there was a man who played Santa Claus, and every Christmas he would go out and sit in his driveway.
Oh, nice.
And cars would line up. People would, you couldn't find a place to park. And then the kids and the families would come and line up in front of Santa. And I did a time or two just to, as an adult, go up and say, he was Santa. He is no longer with us, and that no longer happens. But I want my house to be like that.
Yeah.
I want this to be the storyteller's house. So I was sitting there. This young man, not even from my neighborhood, as it turns out, lives over near the college somewhere. Mm-hmm. He's just walking by, and he's reading the chalk on the sidewalk as I'm packing up, and he stops and he looks at me and says, what is this? I said, I'm here telling stories. I'm just packing up, but okay, well, I'll come. No. I can spend a couple more minutes if you want to hear a story. Would you like to hear a story? And he looked at me. I mean, he has this childlike enthusiasm in his face and his smile. And he looked at me and he said, can you tell me a love story?
Oh,
and
wow.
I said, yes, I can. Let's sit down. And so he sat in my chair, and I thought for a minute about what to tell him. And I ended up telling him a Selkie story.
I was just thinking that. I was just thinking the woman of the sea.
So I ended up telling him a Selkie story. And I had my harp out that day. And I said, would you like to hear the harp? Yes. So I played the harp for him. And he just sat there with this little boy face and this adult, and he was just so happy. And I have this particular harp, and I always let people hold it and try it if they want. And so I said, would you like to try it? I can't do that. Please, you want it? Oh, yes, I want to, so with the harp. And he just sat there. I mean, he just sat there with his harp, running his fingers over the strings. He couldn't play, but he was listening to the sound, and unless it's out of tune, you really can't make a harp sound bad. And he looked up at me and he said, if I come back, would you teach me how to play? And he said, I'll pay you, but he's not paying me. And I said, I would be happy to teach you. So earlier this week, I'm sitting at my computer doing some work in my office when the doorbell rang. And I thought it was a delivery from, UPS delivery from something that I had ordered. So I go down to the door and I opened it, and there's this young man. He was going wherever he goes, and he's on his bicycle.
Uh-huh.
And he looked at me and he said, do you have some time? And I said, well, I'm in the middle of something, but I can give you some time. Would you come out and play for me? Play the harp? I'm going through a really bad day and I need the harp. And, my first thing I heard was a little child, and even myself when I was a kid, stopping at a friend's house and saying, can you come out to play?
Yeah.
And I said, yes, I can do that. So first I gave him a tour of the way back, my yard, which is narrow and deep. And here in the city, you wouldn't know it, but we have this park-like yard. It's amazing, with a fish pond, and I have herbs. And I took him back and I showed him everything. And, I broke off pieces of the various herbs and mints, and he put his nose out for me to hold it up to his nose, and then he put it up to his nose. I gave him a daisy, and I gave him some lavender. And he said, can I keep these? And I said, yes, you can keep those. And we went and we sat in my little Starlight Cafe, which is Starlight because one night my husband told me to come outside with my eyes closed, and he took me out and he had put Christmas lights in the tree. And it's a lilac tree, and we have a little table and chairs there. And so you'll hear me talk about the Starlight Cafe a lot. And so we sat there, and I showed this young man, I played for him a little bit, and I let him take the harp, and he played it a little bit. I showed him how to, what the notes were, and he started singing softly to himself. I was in love with a girl, and I know. And then he looked at me and smiled, and he said, I just wrote a song.
That's brilliant.
He's a poet, apparently. He's written poetry. And so we did that for a little while, and then I told him I do have to get back to work now. And, I'm being cautious because I don't know him yet,
Right,
I
yeah.
don't want to say no because he obviously needs to be there, And he's just so cute and sweet. And so we went out to his bicycle, and when we were out there, he said, do you have a business card? And I said, yes, I'll get it for you. And as I was getting the card, I said, I also have a CD. And so I gave him a CD, one of my CDs, and he looked at it. It's one that I drew the picture of, on the front. I did the artwork. And he said, did you do this? And I said, yes. And he turned it over, and he saw how professional it looked. And he said, is this really yours? And I said, yes, it's really mine. And I said, you can have it. You can have it. He does not have a CD player. I said,
yes, of course not.
He said, not yet, but I'm going to get one. And I'm thinking, please, get it legally.
Yes. Well, there's all these like charity shops, so you can pick them up for a song now. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what the situation is. I don't know him. I don't know the situation, but if that's where God wants me to be, that's where I'm going to be.
That's freaking awesome. That's such a great story. All right, two more things. One is like you're into steampunk, it turns out, because you've written a steampunk story and it's in an anthology, at least one.
Well, I think steampunk is fascinating. I'm not a reenactor. I do know some people who are, and I didn't really know that much about it. But just like everything else in my life, somebody came along and said, I know you're an author. Do you have any steampunk stories for my anthology? And I said, no, but I'll write one.
That's going back to that yes thing again, right?
Yes. So I have stories actually in 3 steampunk books by this young woman for anthologies. And the one, after I wrote it, I realized it was a bigger story, so I've been writing a novel.
Oh, wow. Okay.
For quite a few years. Zeus's Fire. And it is a novel from that short story that went in her anthology. And I am still getting my rejection notices.
I think you got to self-publish and just do it that way.
Well, and I'm also writing a collective novel of short stories about a girl living on the Erie Canal. So
fun.
Sometimes it's hard to figure out where my focus is going to be, so I might work for several months on one and then change to the other. The steampunk story, though, has become 3 books. It's a trilogy.
Wow.
I'm halfway through. I'm almost finished with the second novel, and just about ready to begin the third one. But I went back to trying to get the first one published. So.
That's cool. That's so neat. All right, one more question, which is kind of a 3-parter. And those people that listen to the show will probably guess what this question is. What is your favorite breakfast? Where would your favorite place to eat that breakfast be? And who would you have it with?
Ooh, that is a good question. Well, right now I'm on the IF diet, intermittent fasting, so I kind of skip breakfast, but
or you did?
I do.
Okay, all right, okay.
I have my window that I eat in, and then I can pick out in that window.
Doesn't that defeat the whole idea?
It is great, and I lost almost 20 pounds that way. So,
wow, okay.
Yeah. So my favorite breakfast, I would say, I like the full country breakfast, which is not the same thing as, it depends on what country you're in.
Right.
So I'm going with American.
Okay.
Bacon, eggs, pancakes, hash fries, the whole
sausages, yes.
Yeah. My favorite place to eat it, that could change almost any time, right? But right now it would be in the Starlight Cafe.
Nice, I like that.
In my yard. I like to go out with my breakfast, my coffee, whatever, and just sit there, listen to the birds.
Nice.
And who would I like to have it with? Oh, there's so many choices there. But the one person, famous person, okay, so
okay.
I can name a lot of people who are not famous that I would like to have breakfast with, but there is a famous person that I have a burning desire to meet. I'm not one of those stalking fans. But this one person I have a burning desire to meet, and I have for a long time, and it just gets stronger and stronger and stronger every year. The more he produces his work, the more I want to meet him. I want to spend a whole day as a shadow with this man, Willie Nelson.
Really?
Willie Nelson.
I was not expecting that. That's really cool. Why Willie Nelson? What does he do, or what has he done that?
Well, he's a musician and a singer-songwriter. He's written for a lot of people over the years, and he sings his soul, and he sings like his soul. And he's rough, he's tough. I'm sure he was a druggie and everything else at one point, but he sings his soul. And when he sings, it's like I get goosebumps and chills, and I just like, this man knows what art is supposed to be, and he's living it. He's living it. I want to find out what his secret is. I want to walk with Willie. I want to sit by his side. I want to hear him tell his stories. I want to learn from him. And that's where it's weird, I know, but there's just something about his voice. As soon as he opens his mouth, and his voice, it reaches right inside, and it just wraps itself around my soul.
Wow. That's really neat. I like that. I like the idea. That's really cool.
Willie, if you're listening, I want to meet you.
And she'll have breakfast with you in the Starlight Cafe in her backyard.
I will. I'll even do the cooking.
Who does the cleaning of the dishes, though? Who's going to do the cleaning of the dishes, though?
Well, fortunately, me, since I was a kid. But my parents didn't have a dishwasher till I left home. Then they got it.
My parents had a dishwasher. It was called Colin and Simon, my brother and me.
That's what they always said about me. Yep.
Yeah.
And I don't have one till this day, so.
Oh, good for you. Good for you.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing after we're done. I'm going to do my dishes.
Well, I won't keep you any longer. I know that those dishes need doing. I shall let you go. Lorna, it's been an absolute joy and pleasure to hang out with you for the time that we've had together, and I really appreciate you doing this. Thanks so much indeed.
Simon, you're one of those wonderful little boys I love.
Thank you so much, Lorna.
You've got that spirit, so thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Take care of yourself, all right?
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Willie Nelson was not who I was expecting, I gotta say. But why not? He's certainly an icon. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I hope you enjoyed listening to this podcast, and if you are, be sure to check out other episodes. And if you think I should interview a certain folk and fairy tale, myths and legends storyteller, then shoot me an email. You can find me and my work on Facebook, Simon Brooks Storyteller, on my website, simonbrooksstoryteller.com, and on Instagram, Simon M. Brooks. Diamond Scree, yep, that's me, the English fella and storyteller. A shout out to Chris Jett for creating and recording and letting me use the wonderful music for my podcast. He wrote it especially. His band is called Blackpool Mecca. Check it out. You can help keep this podcast alive and support my craft by becoming one of my patrons. Paying anything from $1 for an episode that you enjoy to a regular monthly subscription, and in return you get extras, early release and exclusive content on my work. You'll find that at www.patreon.com/Simon Brooks. I greatly appreciate all of you who have joined my little tribe. And if you can't join these wonderful folks, then please help me by doing something you can do. I'll be very grateful if you were to leave a review on Podbean, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, wherever you find this episode. It doesn't take long and it helps, not just me but others, to find and enjoy the podcast. Thanks again for being here with me. I know there are a lot of other places you could be. I do appreciate it. Be healthy, be happy, and share the stories you love. Cheers. Simon out.
It's just a story. Just a story. Yep.